invasive species, hidden in the weeds, invasive species, and ticks. So this is a really exciting one. I personally have been looking forward to it a ton because I feel like I'm going to learn a lot today. But my name is Laurel. I am the Education and Outreach Program Manager for the Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management, otherwise known as the Finger Lakes PRISM. I work with Lydia Martin, who is going to be doing the second part of the webinar today. She's our Terrestrial Invasive Species Program Manager. And then Harry Nugent from the Onondaga CCE is going to be giving the first part of the presentation. So I'm very excited to invite them here. Before we get started, I do want to just kind of lay the groundwork for the meeting. Please keep your microphones off so that we do not interrupt the presenters whenever they're speaking. You can put questions in the chat. I'll be moderating and doing my best to answer them as they come. But if it's something that I personally cannot answer, then whenever it comes to the end of their portions, there will be time for questions at the end of each segment and then at the end of the entire webinar. So that is how it's going to be run, but I will go ahead and I'm going to let Harry make you a co-host. All right, I'm going to go ahead and let Harry take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So let me get my slideshow up and going. Okay. Look good, Laurel?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So as Laurel said, my name is Harry Harold Nugent. I work for Cornell Copper Extension in Onondaga County, so central New York, but all of this tick information is very applicable to the whole of New York State. And I'm also excited to hear Lydia's connection to invasive species with ticks, because that's something I'm interested in learning more about. So today we're going to be talking about the ticks themselves, getting to know the arachnid. Actually, they're not insects, they're arachnids, a few of the diseases they carry, and then the hosts, the basic biology, and then how to prevent them through IPM. I'm going to be talking about personal protection today, and then eventually how to remove a tick if you do get bit by one, because hopefully you can avoid that, but there is still a chance that you can get bit even if you're doing everything you can to prevent them. So today we're trying to avoid being bitten, though. That's our goal at the end of the day. So on the screen here, we have two different arthropods. We have a bed bug, has 6 legs. On the other side, we have a black-legged tick or a deer tick. They have 8 legs. So like I said, they're actually arachnids related to spiders, mites, scorpions, but both of these feed on blood. And in the middle here with 6 legs is actually a larval tick. When they first hatch, they only have 6 legs. You're probably never going to see one of those ticks, though. They are so small, you have to literally step on top of them for them to get on you. I've only ever seen a few of them when I'm out actually looking for ticks doing research. So in the world, there's about 1,000 species of ticks that have been identified currently. In the US, there's about 100. About 20 of those are important for either human health or veterinary health. In New York State, we have 5 ticks that we talk about. These are the big 3, though. The American dog tick, which if you have a dog, more than likely you've seen at some point or another, but they are fairly large ticks, and they are really only interested in dogs. They may end up on a person by chance. The black-legged tick or the deer tick, that's the one that's most common in central New York where I am. So that's the one that carries Lyme disease. That's the one that we really talk about in my area. But depending on where you are in the state, the Lone Star tick might actually be the most prevalent tick. So down on Long Island and into the Hudson Valley, the Lone Star tick is extremely prevalent. There are black-legged ticks, there are deer ticks, but the Lone Star tick is the most abundant tick in those areas. We have 2 other ticks in New York State that we do mention. The Gulf Coast tick, which you probably guessed by the name, is more common in the coastal areas such as Long Island, like I mentioned, and then the Longhorn tick. One thing to note about the Longhorn tick, there's only 3 ticks here on this palette compared to the other ticks. There's never been an adult adult male or any male ticks of the Longhorn tick found in the United States. There's only So they're very quickly becoming a large portion of ticks down on Long Island. So that's a tick to look out for as time goes on. But ticks are blood-feeding ectoparasites. So the only thing ticks feed on blood, much like a mosquito, all they care about is having a drink of blood from an animal. Ectoparasite means that they only feed outside of a person. So they're not going into your body. They're sticking their mouth part in. In a few slides, I'll have a picture of that mouth part to talk more about what actually is their method of feeding. but they are masters of stealth. They're very small, but some common things that people have heard that they jump, they'll drop from trees, they'll fly. Being arachnids, they don't fly. There are some spiders that float around on their webs, but there's no actual flying that's going on. They don't drop from trees. They might end up in a tree if they are feeding on a bird, but ticks don't have eyes like we do. They don't see very well. So for a tick to climb up a tree would be very hard for it because it's so small. And then even once it was there, it would not have a good time trying to find a host down below because it can't see like we do. It mostly sees in light. How it's hunting for people and animals is through its scent. It's looking for carbon dioxide, other things in the air that are associated with people and animals. But once they are on you, they will climb around a lot. But before they do that, they're doing this behavior called questing, where they sit and wait for you to come to them. So they use those back legs you can see in the picture, holding on to foliage, usually in grass, up a little bit onto plants, small shrubs, bushes. They're getting a little bit off the ground in areas where animals are moving around, and then they wait for you to walk by. They have those legs out front, and they have little hooks on all the end of their legs. And all it takes is a slight brush against your clothing, your skin, and they grab on and start crawling around. But again, they don't jump, they don't fly, they don't drop from trees. They're sitting and waiting for you to come to them in most instances. They're very small, like I mentioned. So the smallest tick there is the larval tick that I mentioned. It only has 6 legs. You're almost never going to see them, but they are so small. They're like the size of the head of a pin. The next one there is a larval tick. So larval ticks are about the size of a poppy seed. Those are very common in the springtime. That's when they typically are most active. Then you have the adult male and the adult female. Those are larger, but the adult female is not even the size of a grain of rice before it's starting to feed. So it is still small. It still is something you need to be looking out for if you're trying to find it, because once they bite you, they are going to stay on you. A mosquito flies and bites you. It stays on for a few seconds, not very long. Most of the time, you don't notice that it's bit you till it flies away and your arm starts itching. Ticks are going to stay on for a long time, days at a time at least. So this is an adult female. 7 to 10 days is the number that we use. Larval ticks will stay on more in the 3 to 5 range, but we want to catch them before they fed ideally, but as soon as we can after that to lower the chances of disease transfer from the tick to people. So this is the mouth part I mentioned before. If anyone's ever had a bubble tea or a Capri Sun, that's kind of what I compare their mouth to. It's essentially a straw attached to their head, and it has that bevel on the end so it can slide into your skin easily. And then on the sides, it has those serrations. So once it puts its mouth part in, those serrations are going to help it hold on. But it also has a number of things that's saliva to help with that as well. One is a cementing agent, so it's going to lock in there as best it can. It has an anticoagulant, so as it's on you for all those days, it needs to keep feeding throughout that time. So it's going to make you keep bleeding, as well as something to make you not feel the bite. Because it's on you for a while, normally that would agitate our skin, but they have something that prevents that from happening so that they can stay on you for as long as they can. There is some seasonality to ticks, but it's typically where the different life stages are most active. So like I mentioned, so if you have eggs hatching in the spring, early summer, that's when the larval ticks are active. They're typically only feeding on small animals at the time because they're so small. That's what they come across. After that, you have them go back into the leaf litter. That's where ticks spend most of their lives, is actually in the leaf litter. The next spring, they'll reemerge as nymphs. That's when we're first concerned about most disease transmission. And those are the ticks that people most often miss because they're so small, like I said, about the size of a poppy seed. Typically, they feed on small animals again, but there is a chance, certainly, that people can come across them as well. Then they go back in that leaf litter, molt again, and the adults are what people typically think of as ticks, seeing them on themselves or their animals. But their ticks will be active at any time of the year. If the temperature is right, if the conditions are right, they will be out looking for a meal, just like in the middle of winter. If we're out spending time because it's a nice day, animals are out. Ticks are also likely to be out looking for something to eat as well. So there's not really a safe time of year to avoid ticks anymore. We have warm days in the winters. As we have a warming climate, more and more we are seeing ticks that are active in those winter months. Every year I have people telling me that they have seen ticks in December or January when we have a nice 30, 40, 50-degree day. Ticks will be active. Depending on the tick, there is some habitat preference. Where I live in central New York, we don't really hold to this very much because we have a lot of deer ticks, we have a lot of suburbanized areas, we have ticks that live all throughout the city of Syracuse, all throughout our suburbs. So a lot of people think of ticks being a problem in the woods, but if you have deer, if you have the animals in your area, you're going to have ticks that are also in those suburban and even urban areas if you have the hosts for them. And speaking of hosts, I live in central New York. These are the big hosts that we have in central New York, and they will be prevalent throughout most of New York as well. The one you might not recognize down in the middle there is actually a guinea hen. There's some ideas out there that guinea hens or even chickens are a good way to combat ticks on your property. There's not a bad reason to have those things, but they're not good at combating ticks. The ticks we have here in New York State are just as likely to choose them as a host as they are to be eaten by those animals. So the animals that we talk about most, though, for hosts are mice. So the white-footed mouse is present all across New York State, from forests to suburban areas. Wherever there's people, you're going to have rodents, mice included. A lot of these mice, in the research that's been done, are carrying Lyme disease. A lot of them are also carrying more than one disease, and there's more than just Lyme disease out there that ticks are carrying and can cause harm to us. So the other thing we talk about is the deer tick. The black-legged tick is also known as the deer tick. It's where those ticks have their big blood meal to go on to reproduce, but they're actually not a carrier of Lyme disease. That's in those mice, the rodents, the other animals. Deer are really important for their reproductive cycle and making more and more ticks. So there is transmission of disease. The ticks, when they hatch from eggs, don't start with it. They're usually picking them up from rodents or animals that they're feeding on. But once it's in a tick, it carries through that life cycle. And that's when we get concerned about passing to people and our companion animals as well. The vast majority of those diseases do not pass to the egg stage. So it is really the nymphs and adults that we're worried about for disease transmission. In the work that's been done across the state, these numbers are pretty consistent. About 50% of adults carry Lyme disease, and about 25% of nymphs of the black-legged tick carry Lyme disease. And then their other diseases are less prevalent, but are around throughout much of New York State. Most Lyme disease cases are identified in the June-July timeframe. Many of those are from nymph ticks that people did not catch in that spring timeframe when they're first out, spending time outdoors, not noticing those little poppy seed sized ticks. There's been Lyme disease around for quite a long time, but throughout this time series, you can see it starts in 2021 and it's going to end, I believe, in 2020, or it starts in 2003 and ends here in 2019. There's been a massive increase in the number of cases of Lyme disease throughout New York State and also in the upper Midwest. This is the last one from 2023. You can see most of New York State has a large number of Lyme disease cases. It's becoming more and more of a problem here and across many parts of the United States every year. This is a new slide that I've just added today. The Lone Star tick is as a tick that I mentioned. It's not firmly established all across New York, but it is well established in Long Island and up into the Hudson Valley. And that tick carries the allergy to red meat, also dairy and gelatin products. So it is something that is being watched out for because it is establishing more and more up north compared to where historically it's been considered a more southern tick. There are a number of diseases that each tick carries. So Lyme disease is the big concern that I have in central New York, but depending on where you are in the state, different ticks carry different things. Overall, we're just trying to avoid ticks as best we can. And this is again just showing the diseases that we're talking about. They are spread pretty well throughout New York State. Paswana is a more rare disease, but it is very deadly. So it is something that we do need to watch out for and another reason to avoid ticks. The ticks, like I mentioned, can carry more than one disease at once. There's a lab here in central New York, upstate, that does tick testing, and they've found that some ticks that they have tested have carried up to 4 diseases at once. So that would mean 4 different diagnoses, 4 different disease treatments. Trying to avoid ticks is the best outcome that we can have to avoid these diseases. So, done trying to scare you now. We're going to move into what we can do to protect ourselves as best we can from ticks. So that's through a process called integrated pest management. And what we talk about is the Swiss cheese model. So this is something you may have seen through prevention of COVID. the idea that there's not one thing that's going to prevent Lyme disease or prevent ticks in general. We have to take a bunch of small steps and try and mitigate as much risk through each step as we can. So the first thing we can do is avoid areas where we know ticks are. That's not always possible depending on your job, depending on where you live. In central New York here, I have a really hard time telling people to avoid ticks altogether because it's just not possible if you're going to be spending a lot of time outdoors. But you can be thinking about how ticks are behaving. They're doing this questing behavior. They're waiting for you to come to them. So the path that's open and sunny and wide and you don't have a lot of overhanging vegetation, that's where you're least likely to run into ticks. As you move across the progression, you get into the deep woods where there's a lot of ferns, you're on a very narrow path. So it's not a bad place to be. It's a great place to go out and spend some time in the woods, but you do need to be thinking about ticks much more if you're spending time on that path versus the first one. Um, a big thing that we can do in our start for preventing ticks is dressing to exclude. So wearing long pants, long sleeves, and then tucking them in. So both shirt into pants as well as pants into your socks. Great way to create barriers to prevent ticks from getting to your skin for as long as possible, giving you more time to notice them. People sometimes duct tape their uh, shoes or around their ankles as well to both catch ticks or prevent them from getting in. Light colored clothes is a good option, not because it prevents ticks, but it lets you see those little black dots that ticks are that are going to be crawling around looking for a place to bite. And then if you do have a tick on you, like I said, it's going to be moving around. You will be able to have more time if you're all covered up and you're wearing that light colored clothes. It'll be easier to see those ticks moving. One of my colleagues, Joanne Lampman, this is a picture of her. She's taken to using mosquito net clothing as a more breathable option because in the summer it's not fun to wear a long sleeve and long pants, but mosquito net clothing allows you that breathability, but also that layer to prevent ticks from getting straight onto your skin. So another option to consider as we're getting into this warmer weather for the year. Another great thing is repellents. So pretty much all of your over-the-counter repellents that have picaridin, DEET, IR3535, those are the repellents that are most commonly used. They'll prevent most insects that you're wanting to deal with, and they're also good at preventing ticks as well. Oil of lemon eucalyptus is another good preventative, but it's more naturally derived. So typically they last not as long. So make sure you just are following all of the instructions on those labels. Each one is a little bit different. And even if you're going from the same company, the application of that individual repellent might be slightly different. So follow those to have them be most effective. Another great thing to prevent ticks is permethrin. The repellents are something that you can use as you're walking out the door, starting your hike, whatever it is you're doing outdoors. Permethrin is a step that you have to take before you're going out. It's something that you can apply to your clothing or your shoes. It's very good at repelling ticks, but you need to, if you're buying an over-the-counter spray, just a spray bottle, you need to apply it ahead of time and let it set into your clothing. Make sure you're really closely following that label to make sure you're doing it safely. That includes wearing gloves. Sometimes even a mask or eye covering are recommended depending on the bottle directions, but this is an application at least a couple of days ahead of time to make sure it's bonded to the clothing, but it is very toxic to cats, so something to consider as you're applying it. Just make sure you're following those label instructions as best you can. After you've spent your time outdoors, though, when you come inside, we suggest drying your clothing first. That is going to kill any of the ticks that are on you. Using a high setting for somewhere in the realm of 15 to 20 minutes is usually sufficient to dry those ticks out and kill them. If you're doing that, that's a great time to do the thing that we really push is the tick check. I always tell people if you can't take any of these other measures, doing the tick check at the end of the day is the most important thing you can do, and really getting in the habit of doing it every day. If you're spending even 3 days outdoors every week, I suggest to people that they do a tick check every day. And it's head to toe, top to bottom. Ticks will be in your hair. Typically, they don't bite in the scalp, but they like to be at that hairline, any place where there's a lot of blood vessels right at close to the skin, or that's more warm and moist. So your armpits, groin, down between your toes. Make sure that you're doing a thorough tick check after you're spending a day outdoors and continue doing it. If you don't catch a tick that first day, the next best thing is catching it the next day. You want to lower the chances of disease transmission as best you can, and preventing ticks from biting you and having them attached for a little amount of time will make that a better situation. So, like I said, we want to catch ticks before they fed, but as quickly as we can after them, and they will stay on you for days. So keep doing those tick checks to make sure you're catching all the ticks that you have been exposed to. Um, that mouth part is what we're up against. It's sticking that in. It's going to be feeding for multiple days. If you're not going and removing a tick once it's bit, it's going to stay on you till it's done feeding, and that's going to increase the chances of disease being passed to you. And that's not what anybody wants. So if you do get bit by a tick, there's only one way that we suggest removing a tick. This is not that. Anything that's going to agitate the tick is not going to decrease the chances of a disease being passed. It's likely to increase it. So grabbing that back end of a tick where it's holding the disease, you're likely to squirt some of that disease material into you. If you're doing anything like burning, petroleum jelly, alcohol, I've had people tell me they just agitate the area around the tick until it falls off. All of those things are going to upset the tick, make it more likely to spread disease to you. The way that we suggest removing ticks is as fine-tipped tweezers as you can find, grabbing the tick right at the head and removing them. So I have 2 slides coming up that are going to show little videos of ticks being removed. So if you're squeamish, you might want to look away, but they are important to show what it's going to take. So this is an adult tick that's embedded. Once you'll see the tweezers coming in, you want to grab as close to the skin as you can, grabbing that tick right at the head, and then you're going to pull it straight up. But you can see the elasticity in the skin there. That tick is fully into that mouth part is fully in. You need to make sure you're grabbing it and removing it with that upward motion to make sure it comes out cleanly. This is a nymph tick that has not been on for that long, but you're going to still, let's see, there we go. Still see those tweezers come in, grabbing the tick as close to the skin as you can and pulling straight up. That one comes out easier, but you got to make sure that you're getting in as close as you can, disturbing that back end as little as possible. You can save the tick afterward if you'd like. Something like saran wrap, a Ziploc bag, putting in the freezer, it'll kill and preserve the tick. So that way you could have it tested later. But we always suggest telling your healthcare provider whenever you've been bitten by a tick, make sure it's in your medical records. So you can either come up with a course of treatment with your medical provider at that time, or for them to follow up with you later on if you start developing symptoms. Different ticks have slightly different head shapes, body shapes, different coloration. Having some knowledge of what those ticks looks like can make it easier to help your healthcare provider diagnose what you might be dealing with. So there are materials out there that Cornell and IPM provide to help learn about that. And overall, what we want to think about, though, is that Swiss cheese model, doing everything we can to prevent ticks as much as we can and avoiding those tick areas, dressing as appropriately as we can with those long sleeves and long pants and tucking them in, using our repellents, treating our clothing, doing tick checks throughout the day, even if you're taking a break for lunch, taking a break from the work you're doing. That's a great time to do a tick check then, and then really do a thorough one at the end of the day, and remove any ticks that you find as safely as you can, but as quickly as you can as well. So I want you all to spend time outdoors, but we do want to be safe when we're doing it. So happy to take any questions now. If you want more information about ticks, Don't Get Ticked NY is a great resource for that. Cornell IPM has a lot of information. If you're looking for information about diseases, the New York State Health Department, as well as the CDC, have great resources for that. I'm located in Central New York. I'm available to answer questions, but for other localities, your local CCEs also are great resources for any of this information as well.
Great. Any questions for Harry? You can put them in the chat or you could raise your hand. And thank you, Harry. That was a really wonderful presentation. I learned a ton. And I believe Vincent just raised a hand.
Yeah, so I'll take
Yes.
the question. Yeah, go ahead, Vincent.
Does permethrin kill or just repel the tick?
I think it usually depends on how long the tick is exposed to the permethrin. It's very good at repelling, but if you have a tick that gets stuck on you on permeated treated clothing, I have heard of people just having ticks die on them from that exposure. I do see a couple questions in the chat. Does a very cold winter reduce tick prevalence? It can. I been telling people this year that I don't think that it reduced the prevalence of ticks this year because when we had the coldest parts of our winter this year, we had a lot of snow on the ground. Ticks are very small. They're hiding in leaf litter for insulation. And then when you have that snow layer on top, it's an additional insulator. So uh, if you have a cold winter where you don't have a lot of snow, it certainly could have an influence. But on the winter we had this year, I don't think it had a lot of influence on it. Another question. We have had good luck with insect shield treatment of clothing. We send to them. Yeah, insect shield is one of the places where you can send clothing to get it treated with permethrin. Those will last longer than if you treat themselves. So that's a great resource to use. What do you think about those twisty gizmos for removing ticks? So there's a lot of different things on the market that you can buy to remove ticks. They can be effective for adult ticks. They're not typically made for nymphs. We really suggest fine tip tweezers as the main thing to use. That's making sure you're getting as close to the skin as possible and not disturbing the tick. If you're using one of those devices and it doesn't get the tick off the first time, you're increasing the likelihood that you might be agitating the tick and have some transmission there. So those things can work, but it's not what we suggest people use. Is it possible ticks are deterred by individuals with certain blood mutations that increase clotting? Thought of this when you mentioned the anticoagulant they produce. That I don't know. I haven't heard of anything like that, but that would be an interesting thing to look into for some research in the future. And yeah, it looks like Lydia is going to answer our next question. So the last comment I see is I remove my clothing and throw outside from the doorway, no close neighbors. If ticks are on clothing, this is better than the dryer. If I left them outside overnight, then I immediately take a shower. So if you throw the clothes back outside, that won't kill the ticks, but they're unlikely to stay on the clothing because they're looking for food. But taking a shower, that's a perfect time to do a tick check right after you're getting in the shower there. The last thing I see is removal of ticks within 24 hours in humans makes Lyme disease less likely, correct? Is this true in dogs too? I'm not sure about dogs. The typical timing that is used for Lyme is around 24 hours, but different diseases have different times in which they transmit. So just because you got a tick off in the first 24 hours doesn't mean that you're safe from every disease out there. So we really want to make sure that we're finding and moving ticks as quickly as possible. So I'll leave it there. And at the end, after Lydia's done, if you have more questions, I can jump back in.
Yeah, and I think we do have one more that we can answer really quickly that I saw, and that was, do they drop off pets and continue to
Oh,
live?
yes. So if they've been on an animal and fed, they're likely to be heading back to that leaf litter to go through the rest of their life cycle. Um, they do not just die after they feed. They're continuing their life cycle. They're looking to go back and hide after they've fed.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Harry. That was really great. And I learned so much actually. I didn't even know about the fine tip tweezers thing. So
Ah,
that was good for me to learn. But perfect. We will go ahead. Vincent, we'll save your question for the end of the after Lydia's finished talking. We'll have some more time for some extra questions. But Lydia, I'm going to let you take it away.
Okay, great. Can you see everything okay? Okay, great. All right. As Laurel mentioned, I'm Lydia Martin, the Terrestrial Invasive Species Program Manager for the Finger Lakes Prism. And before I get started, I just wanted to give a little background about where the Finger Lakes Prism is located. We are hosted at the Finger Lakes Institute at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, which has the mission of translating knowledge and research about the Finger Lakes watershed into collaborative action. They do this by promoting water resources, natural systems. We like to connect science and research with regional community needs and provide actionable science education and outreach to environmental issues. Just like what we're doing right now. So zooming in on the Finger Lakes Prism, There are 8 prisms across the state. Ours is as big as 17 counties. It's the largest prism region. They're in the middle of the state, including all of those Finger Lakes. The mission of the prism is to reduce the introduction, spread, and impact of invasive species within the Finger Lakes prism through coordinated education, detection, prevention, and control measures. So fit right into that Finger Lakes Institute mission. We are a network of state, federal, local agencies, NGOs, all the stakeholders that care about the environment and invasive species. And we're funded through the New York State Environmental Protection Fund, administered by the New York State DAC. And I can't emphasize enough how important our partners are. This is a slide here that just lists some of our partners that we work with regularly. So, like I said, it's a very large region, so being able to leverage our partners to be able to get work done in a larger region is critical to our work. And so, before I get started into ticks and invasive species, for those that don't know, an invasive species is a non-native species that causes harm to the environment, economy, or human health. So environmental harm can be reducing biodiversity, disrupting function, economics, such as the spotted lanternfly right now, damages agriculture, vineyards, forests, or recreation, but also human health, such as like giant hogweed that can cause burns. Right here is the invasion curve, which many of you have probably seen. It's in almost every invasive species presentation, but it highlights how prevention is critical to reducing management costs and time to get rid of the invasives. You want to get a population out before it establishes and causes problems. All right. So how can invasive plants affect tick populations? There are 2 main mechanisms for this. The first mechanism here on this slide is invasive plants can change microclimates that also affect tick survival. So what exactly does that mean? So in certain shrubs will increase tick populations, and that's because they grow very densely and they create a much cooler temperature and a higher humidity in those little micro habitat areas amongst the shrubs. So that decreases the desiccation of the ticks, causing an increased survival rate. Examples of these species are Japanese barberry and wineberry. I'll go over both of those in more detail later, and also Kogan grass, which is more prevalent out west. But there are actual examples of decrease in ticks by some invasives, so I figured it's only fair to talk about those as well. Some species will actually create higher localized temperature and lower humidity, or also some changes in leaf litter, which is very important for tick habitat. So examples of this are like Japanese stilt grass. Those have the higher temperature, the lower humidity, and so ticks can't survive as well in those infestations. Multiflora rose reduces leaf litter underneath it, which reduces tick habitat, and also rhododendron has some chemicals in the leaf litter that decrease the ticks. So this can go both ways. We're going to focus mostly on the invasive species that increase ticks, but you can see here on this image in the right, higher temperature, lower humidity is preferred for us, not for the ticks. And so this diagram here is taken from a research article, Hyatt et al. They studied mechanistic pathways of tick exposure risk in invaded and uninvaded plant communities. And you can see here, red are invaded areas, and on the y-axis you have days survived. So for the nymphs, you can see their survival rates were higher than the blue lines, which are the native species. And then on the right here for the adults, you can see that sharp increase in survival in invaded areas, and then for the blue uninvaded native areas, you can see they have decreased survival rates. So this just shows how those microclimates are really important for tick survival. And this study showed that Lone Star ticks survived 50% longer in Kogan grass than in native vegetations. And invaded areas did, in fact, have that lower temperature and higher humidity, and also lower vapopressure deficit, which is important for plant transpiration and affects the humidity. The second mechanism for how invasives can increase tick populations is they alter host activity and abundance in those areas. So dense shrubs can increase host activity by they provide cover from predators. Harry was talking about, mice and deer and other critters like that. So they like to have places to hide. And invasive shrubs, they provide the perfect habitat for that. Also, nesting habitat, yeah, lots of protection and cover. And they also create travel corridors for these species as well. Examples of these are Japanese barberry and wineberry again. As you notice, both of those are hit both the changes in microclimate as well as increasing host activity. But then also honeysuckle and buckthorn are also known to increase the presence of those mice and deer and other host species that those ticks are trying to get a meal from. All right, so wineberry is our first case study we'll talk about. These researchers, Peyton Phillips and Jocelyn Bem, they compared invaded and uninvaded regions and tick populations in southern Pennsylvania. And they found that there was higher black-legged tick abundance in invaded plots, higher tick-borne pathogen prevalence in invaded areas. They also found increased small mammal activity in those dense wineberry thickets, and those thickets did in fact have a humid understory, and which improved the tick survival and also tick host encounters. So the takeaway from this research article is dense wineberry thickets may increase tick populations by creating that humid habitat and attracting small mammal hosts. So you get the double whammy there. And then there's Japanese barberry, which many of you might be familiar with. And this is the most researched and invasive species that increases tick populations. It was mentioned in countless studies. It just really grows in this dense whorled leaf pattern that just really creates those microhabitats. So in the research, they did find there's higher tick abundance in barberry infested areas, a higher abundance of infected ticks, considering those diseases that Harry was talking about. They provide cool, humid microclimates that improve tick survival. Again, increase encounters between ticks and mice, and that dense cover, important for those hosts. So, dense Japanese barberry infestations can increase tick abundance by creating humid microclimates and providing cover for hosts. Again, and then on top of all of that, there's deer. So as Harry already mentioned, deer are a common host for ticks. So they already are bringing them around, spreading them to new areas. And then deer also, they preferentially browse for native plants. So they reduce competition, and then they allow invasive species to expand because they're not eating them. They have no interest in eating most invasives. So, and then deer are overpopulated, also carrying the ticks. So it just escalates the situation. And then, so deer indirectly can increase tick habitat by promoting that invasive plant dominance. And you can see here on this diagram on the right from another research study that does show it's complicated. There's high deer density, especially in upstate New York, and you can see on the diagram there's multiple different pathways, and sometimes when deer can actually decrease transmission of diseases and tick populations by creating shorter vegetation, which decreases that habitat. But more commonly, you see on the left there, uh, they they create they have that effect of creating a habitat that is more invaded by invasives and better habitat for the ticks. And so increasing tick populations as well as increasing that disease burden. So very complicated situation regarding ticks and invasives and everything else. And so can management reduce tick populations? This is a good question. It's still being researched. the more I researched before this presentation, the more it made me want to try to combine management efforts with tick studies just to get better information. But there has been research that does suggest that removing invasive shrubs will often reduce tick abundance. There are some studies that did show there was no difference, but those were few and far between. Research also suggests that the effects of pathogen prevalence and in correlation with the invasives is much less consistent. So there's just so many steps in between. So the research has not been able to tease apart the details and the connection between invasives and the pathogen prevalence at this time. But managing deer populations as well as invasive plants and potentially even managing the ticks themselves all together with that integrated pest management will provide the greatest benefit. But yeah, like I said, more research is needed to determine exactly how management affects tick populations as well as human disease risk. And so this here just talks about more about those future research needs. As I mentioned earlier, not all invasive plants affect ticks in the same way. Japanese barberry and wineberry are really create those ideal situations for ticks and the tick hosts. But then you have those other species like stiltgrass and multiflora rose, which might decrease ticks. There is more research needed on management outcomes, as I just mentioned. And I also to point out the research is tricky because you have so many different species, and then you have so many different diseases that people might be looking at when they're doing studies. So trying to have more species involved in this research so we can really get a handle about what these ecosystem dynamics are occurring. But this diagram here from one of the journal articles, Flory et al., just shows how complicated the situation is. You can see you have things like the climate, the landscape, also disturbance. Was the field just mowed or tilled? Those are all very large overarching factors in tick populations, but then and then you have those microclimates that we've already talked about. And then plant invasion changes the structure of a forest and the soil and leaf litter. It changes everything, and then disturbance could affect host habitat. But in these researchers, you can see the lines that have numbers on them. All of those numbered lines are where we need further research. So just to get better idea about microclimates of different species that affect tick survival or host habitat, host activity. There's a lot of factors, and so teasing apart those differences will just take more research. So hopefully more on this to come, especially with all of the tick populations booming in the area and Lyme disease as well. Hopefully that'll be motivation to get some studies going to figure out some more answers. And so the key takeaways are invasive plants can influence tick populations by altering habitat conditions for ticks and their hosts. Dense invasive vegetation often creates that cooler, more humid climates that improve tick survival, prevents them from drying out. Some invasive shrubs provide cover and habitat for wildlife hosts, which increases that opportunity for tick-host interactions. Deer can indirectly amplify all of these effects by promoting invasive plant growth and dominance by selectively browsing for that native vegetation. And then managing invasive plants may help reduce tick habitat and should be considered as part of an integrated tick management strategy. Overall, healthier forests are more resilient. So any invasive species management overall will help have a more healthy ecosystem. All right, I think I flew right through that, but here are some of the references and that informed this presentation. And does anyone have any questions? yes, dynamics going on there. I do not know the answer off the top of my head, but I definitely think that is a possibility. But yeah, like the leaf litter is not the only factor. You also have that humidity and the temperature effects and things like that. So that is very interesting.
Great. And Patricia just asked, what about native shrubs? We need them to feed birds.
Native shrubs, what's is it asking about the native shrubs effect on ticks?
I am not sure, Patricia, if you want to elaborate a little bit.
Yes, that's what I was saying. You know, we're all trying to plant more bird habitat.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, I mean, I'm certainly not in favor of barberry, but I mean, I don't see that uh, many native shrubs are going to just favor the same conditions that the ticks like too. But we can't stop planting them.
Yeah, I actually researched that a little bit prior to this, and I don't believe there's any native shrubs that are known to cause an increase in tick populations. They just don't. The thing is invasive plants, they often have that they don't have those predators in this area, so they really do just completely take over and crowd out other species. We don't have as many native species that do have a similar growth habit where they just will completely take over an area and create that really perfect habitat for the ticks. Obviously, the ticks can still survive on native shrubs if it's just there's none in the research show an increase in tick population for a native species. Um, could there be a species out there that people haven't studied that found the effect? Maybe, but they just don't grow in that same way as invasive shrubs do, is my answer. Although I don't know for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so keep planting those native shrubs. We want to feed
Yeah,
those
I wasn't
birds.
going to stop.
Yeah, perfect.
Great. And we've got a question from James. Do solar farms produce the same cooler, moist environment for ticks like invasive plants?
Solar farms, that's a good question as well that I do not know. And all great questions for potential research projects. Um, I don't know if someone's actually studied that yet. They, yeah, so if they are providing shade, it depends the humidity. I can't imagine that they probably are providing shade, so it's cooler temperatures. But I guess it depends on if they are increasing that humidity. But that's a great question. I do not know.
Great. Any additional questions? This is also an opportunity if you had questions for Harry and Lydia both, or just Harry, anything that you want to ask, this is open call.
One thing that I didn't get to mention that I would add for goes along with what Lydia talked about of not having as many invasives, mentioning the leaf litter that ticks live in. If you're trying to minimize your risk around your own property, moving that leaf litter out of your active areas as best you can will help to reduce the likelihood that you're going to be interacting with ticks right in like your yard, say, or pushing them back into the wooded area near your home if you have that.
But unfortunately, we've been advised to leave the leaf litter there because so many insects are overwintering in it. And I'm a horticulture person, and we're all advised to leave the leaf litter there so that the insects can overwinter.
Yes, there's definitely a dynamic to go there depending on what your biggest concern is. If you live in an area with a lot of ticks, then it's something you might consider. And I would not saying like to eliminate it full scale, but to if you can move it away from the areas where you're interacting the most, that can be beneficial. But there's certainly very good reason to have leaf litter for the other native insects that we're trying to facilitate.
My husband and I are both participants in the Lyme vaccine study that's been going on. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Mhm.
And we got our results. We both got the vaccine we found out a few months ago. We were invited to continue, which meant we got another vaccine shot. We got another shot. We don't know whether it was a vaccine or not. And so this is going on. There's like 1,000 people participating in, I don't know if anybody in the Syracuse area is, but we drive,
I'm not sure.
we're south of Ithaca, so we drive down to Sayre to Robert Packer, Pennsylvania. And I can't help thinking that there's all this work going on. And meanwhile, the other diseases are moving in, and the Lyme vaccine won't help a bit with them.
Yes, that is the concern with from the public health perspective, that the Lyme disease vaccine will help with Lyme disease, but it will give people potentially a false sense of security that they're not thinking about ticks as they should and protecting themselves from those other diseases. There was actually just before this a great piece on NPR, their On Point program, that was starting to talk about that. So something that you could listen to learn a little bit more for those that are interested in ticks.
Perfect. And yeah, thank you, Harry, for your response. I'm going to direct some questions really quickly. Paula, I'm going to go with you first, then Vincent, then Dolores, and then Sophie. So Paula asked, are there any animals/insects that eat ticks?
There are I'm not aware of insects that are feeding on ticks. Animals will eat ticks, like we mentioned, the chicken and the guinea hen. In central New York, where I am, there's no animals that will that eat them just as their whole source of food. Ticks are very small. They're not very energetically full of energy for something to be eating them. So it's usually more of a incidence of eating them, or animals will clean themselves and eat them by doing that, but it's not usually a major part of anything's diet.
Thank you. And Vincent, I believe your hand is up.
Thank you. I'm also participating in a trial. It's a drug trial for ticks. It's a previously approved veterinary drug that's supposed to kill the tick before it can transmit the Lyme disease to you. Definitely kills mosquitoes mid bite. I knew I wasn't in the placebo group, but I also had participated in the biomonitoring New York, where they look for permethrin in blood urine. And although I've been treating my clothes with a heavy dose of the over the counter, not the Sawyer brand, but concentrated with a backpack sprayer, I treat my clothes in the clothesline. And I was nearly undetectable for that, 2 orders of magnitude below the stuff. And I treat my clothes every wash, which is probably unnecessary. But in discovering this, babiosis is one of those other tick-borne diseases that's checked by the American Red Cross for blood donors. And I wondered if tick-borne disease and tick biology people work together.
Great. Thank you, Vincent. And Dolores asked, does a wood mulch reduce prevalence of ticks?
So in the chat, Joan Lampman, she's a prominent tick researcher here in New York State. She responded, I found many ticks within mulch areas. Wood mulch can serve as a visual cue that you are leaving a less tick risky area into a more tick risky area. I do also just want to bring attention to another point she made. Research out of Rutgers has shown that leaving the leaves has no impact on tick numbers. Raking or blowing leaves into wood edge will increase black-legged tick nymphs up to 3 times. So not directly aligned with what I said. So I would follow her advice as opposed to my own. And sorry, did you say earlier that Lone Star tick is spreading locally from other regions? So the map that I showed that there is establishment in the southern parts of New York State into the Hudson Valley. In some other parts, the range historically is believed to be as far north as Albany, New York. That's what kind of the yellow of that map was showing. But there are Lone Star ticks in New York, and eventually they will be spreading more those yellow areas versus the red showing establishment. Yellow means that it's likely that the Lone Star tick could survive there. They've just not have been found to be established there in the research, but it doesn't mean they are not there or you could not find them there.
Perfect. Thank you, Harry. And thank you, Joe Ellen, also for jumping in and welcome. Happy to have you here. And yeah, do we have any additional questions? We have maybe time for one or two extra ones.
I actually have a question for Harry. Has there been any difference in habitat for any of these different species of ticks that you've seen, or are they all pretty much similar habitats?
Um, I mean, so the one slide is trying to get at that. The ticks that
Oh, that.
has historically been in this area, the black-legged tick, the deer tick, the dog tick, in areas where there were more deer in those wood and fragment areas, or the wooden edge habitats is where we historically used to think of them, but it really depends on the local environment that you're living in. Like being here in central New York, like yes, there are deer ticks that are in the middle of our wooded areas, but everything is so close and interconnected that even if you are in the urban environment, it doesn't mean there are unlikely to be ticks there because you have deer that are walking through those areas. It can be very different though, depending on where you are in the state and what your local makeup is.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any additional questions before we conclude the webinar? I always want to play the Jeopardy theme song whenever I ask this question. There's nothing. And I think, Lydia, you actually made me realize I might have wineberry in my yard, so I'm going to be going home to check that out. Because I was like, wait a minute, that looks like something I might know.
Oh no.
I know. So, yeah. Well, thank you both
Um,
so much for the presentation. Oh, do we have, I heard
my
maybe a voice.
understanding from
Yes, Patricia.
a gardener who lives south of Ithaca near Maine is that wineberry is not very winter hardy. So it's relatively uncommon among local fruit gardeners. But I do wonder whether my raspberry patch is going to, which I love, of course, it's prone for seeing infestation by ticks.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm not sure yet. It just made me, it kind of put a bell in my head that I'm gonna go home and look at this now. But yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Harry, both so much for doing this webinar. This is part of our seasonal webinar series. So we will have a summer webinar coming up. We put this on the tail end of spring because technically, yes, it is still spring, not according to the weather outside. It's very hot, but this is part of our seasonal webinar series, so please stay on the lookout for our summer webinar that'll be happening and participate in events with the Prism and the Onondaga CCE. They have really amazing stuff going on as well. But I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and thank you for attending.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.